Okay, hello everybody. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to make a histogram on Excel. Now, I've broken this up into 3 videos. The first one, sort of the basic introduction into making a histogram. The second video is going to cover how do you make a histogram if there's a gap in the data. And the third is going to cover how do you make what's called a relative frequency histogram. Now let's start by opening up the Chapter 1 Excel example spreadsheet that we used in the last video. Now, what we need to do is find the tab at the bottom that says Example 1.4 Histogram 1. Now, if you don't see this tab, you can toggle the left and right arrows on the lower left-hand corner of the screen until you see it. Okay, now where does this data come from? Well, Example 1.4 in the textbook is pages 21 through 23, and it looks at the percent of on-time graduations by high school students in each state in the United States, including the District of Columbia. All right. Now, first things first, anytime that you're going to make a histogram, you're going to want to sort the data from smallest to largest. So the reason that we want to do this is because in the future, we're going to have to calculate what's called the center of the data, and that's going to require the data to be sorted beforehand. So what we're going to do is click and highlight all of the data, and then right click, go to sort, and then custom sort. And we're going to sort by the numerical values, which is in the percent column. And it automatically does smallest to largest, which is good. That's actually what we want. So now I'm going to click OK. And now the data is sorted. So making a histogram is 2 parts. The first is you have to create what's called a pivot table, which is a fancy word for a frequency distribution table. And then after that, from the pivot table, you're going to create the graph of the histogram. So let's start by doing the pivot table. Anytime that you're going to create a histogram, you need 2 columns of information. The first column is going to be the individuals, which is the states. The second column is going to be the data values, which is the percentages. The region is just extra information. It's just telling us what region of the United States are each of these states from. So Nevada is counted from the western portion. Georgia accounts for the southern portion, so on and so forth. All we need to do to make a pivot table, again, is just the individuals and the data values, or in this case, the states and the percent. So we're going to highlight all of that information. All right. Once it's highlighted, we're going to go to Insert and then Pivot Table. Now, it says choose the data that you want to analyze. Well, if we highlighted the data before, it pre-prints everything that we need into the table range box. Now, at the bottom, it says choose where to place the pivot table. Do not select new worksheet. We're going to place it always in the existing worksheet, and that also goes for the homework. So it says existing worksheet. Now, we need to tell it where to put the table. I'm going to choose to place the table starting in the E2 entry. So when I click on that, it pre-prints all the code that's needed and puts that in there, and then click OK. Now this is giving us an empty pivot table. Now we have to construct the pivot table. So how do we do this? Well, look at the table, or look at the boxes that are on the right-hand side of the Excel spreadsheet. The percents, which are the values, we're going to drag to the rows. The individuals, which are the states, we're going to click and drag to the values. So anytime that you're doing this, the numerical values always get placed in rows, and the individuals always get placed in the values box. Okay, so it gives us sort of a starting point to make the pivot table. And what I mean is, it goes through each individual value and tells us how many times it appears. Okay, we don't want that. What we want to do is create a frequency distribution table where we have this broken up in the rows column by ranges of values of equal size. So how do we do this? Well, you're going to start by clicking on the first entry, right click, and then go to group, because we're going to start grouping all the data. Now, in the textbook, we conveniently chose to start the table at 60. So in the box where it says starting at, I'm going to erase and type over the number 60. Ending at, just leave that alone because Excel will calculate the ending value for us. Now by is where we're going to put the class width, or in Excel lingo, it's called the bin width. So we're doing this by a class width or bin width of 5. So I'm going to type 5 in there and then click OK. And now we have our pivot table, or in other words, our frequency distribution table. So from 60 to 65, we have one state. From 65 to 70%, we have one state. 70 to 75%, we have 5 states, so on and so forth. After creating your pivot table, you want to make sure that the classes, which are in the row, the first column here, okay? The classes, or sometimes in Excel lingo, it's called the bins, do not skip any classes. So what do I mean? Check that there's continuity between the classes, 60 to 65, 65 to 70, 70 to 75, 75 to 80, 80 to 85, 85 to 90, 90 to 95. So notice that there is no gaps in the bins or the classes themselves. In the next video, we'll cover what happens when you have a gap in the data. Okay, so the pivot table is done. How do we create the actual histogram? What we're going to do is click and select all the data in the pivot table except the bottom row that says grand total. The grand total row just basically verifies for us that we had 51 data values, which makes sense because there's 50 states. If you add the District of Columbia, you're going to have a total of 51 values. Okay, so highlight the data. Then we're going to go to Insert, and then click on the column box and select the first one that's right under 2D column. And it gives us a starting point for the histogram. Now, if you turn in the histogram like this, you're not going to receive full credit. This is not a histogram. In a histogram, the bars connect and you have titles for both the X and the Y axis. So we have to follow a very specific set of steps in order to create a complete histogram. So hear me out. First, click on the box so that way the entire graph is highlighted. Then you're going to click on Design here at the top. Now we're going to select a design for the histogram. Specifically, I'm going to choose Style 6 here. The reason I'm choosing Style 6 is because I can clearly delineate the bars from one another, meaning that you have lines outlining each box. I don't really like Style 1 because there's no clear lines outlining each box. Now, don't pick Style 4 and don't pick Style 5. The reason I'm saying that is because it gives you the frequency for each class, but the problem is that it doesn't print a y-axis. So don't select Style 4 or Style 5. I'm just going to pick Style 6. Okay, so we have our bars. And then next what we're going to do is go to Quick Layout. So go to Quick Layout and select, now this is a must, you have to select Layout 7. Don't select any of the other ones. Select Layout 7. Why am I selecting Layout 7? Because it'll pre-print a box for me to type in an X-axis title and a box for the Y-axis title. So we're going to put those in right now. So I'm going to highlight that. And then over it, I'm going to type for the X-axis, % of on-time high school graduates. And then I'm going to double click in the box for the Y-axis title and type over that the number of states. And that's essentially the frequency or the tally within each class. And then click out of that. Now next, we have to make sure all the bars are touching. So how do we do that? Double click on one of the bars, and then you're gonna see this pop up here that says Format Data Series. Select the bars that are touching each other here. And then at the bottom, you're gonna see something that says Gap Width. We're gonna make that go to 0. So now all the bars are connected. Okay, now 2 more things before we're finished with this. The font is way too small. So click on one of the edges of the box, go to Home, and then we're gonna change the font size. I'm just gonna pick 14. And then we're gonna stretch out the graph so we have a more clearer picture. Now, the last step is optional. You don't have to do this. If you double click in the bars, what you can do is right click after and put Add Data Labels, and it'll put the frequency or how tall each bar is within each class. Okay, so what I want you to do here is delete the graph, highlight and delete the table, and then recreate this histogram going through all the steps. First creating the pivot table and then creating the histogram itself. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me after class on Friday or during office hours. All right, guys, take care.